Let's see. Welcome, Karthik. Welcome, Lucas. Hi, Jaideep. Hey, Scott. All right. Okay. As you are slowly starting to show up, hi, Daniel. How are you? Let me hear some thoughts. We'll start with what unexpected personal skill has actually enhanced your leadership? I cannot wait for Sylvia's answer, but we'll hold off. I just want to hear from people in the audience first. All right, let's go. Who's the brave soul? Who wants to share? Don't make me call you out, because I will.
I'll go. Let me quickly switch on the camera. So I have a little background noise. Please excuse this. For me, this was actually endurance sports because a lot of like leadership and management philosophies and metaphors lead to management and leadership being a marathon rather than a sprint. And just like taking that mental capacity of actually enduring an endurance race is something that can be very helpful in supporting you in your management style and leadership style. So that is something that helped me a lot. Just knowing out of this very private sports competitions that I'm capable of doing so and being in for the long run.
Yeah, fantastic. Endurance is such an underrated skill, especially if you're doing something like a marathon. So amazing. We have a couple more in the chat. Amira, connecting people. Yes. I mean, you're just so naturally gifted at that. I can tell. I can tell it's your superpower. Um, Vasily, getting a skipper's license taught me a lot about leadership. I do not want to come across as extremely uneducated in this, but a skipper as in like a captain's license, like doing a boat. I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding that. Captain of a boat? Yeah. Oh, yachting. Oh my God. Okay. Yes. Okay. Whew, educated guess. There we go. Uh, Jaideep, thinking ahead, and Daniel again, knowing the circle of influence. Okay, amazing. Mark, great to see you. Teresa, nice to see you again. Elizabeth, hi, nice to see you. Okay, let us get going. I want to hear from Sylvia. Sylvia, let's hear your personal underrated skill that helped you become a better leader.
Yeah, see, I don't know if I would call this a skill, but I feel like I have my pet peeve for inefficiencies has really translated into leadership. Like I can't take seeing inefficient things in front of me. So like for example, I live in Toronto and actually I would know this because she was in Toronto too. The Toronto Transit Commission is really poorly run. And so whenever I see their streetcars, like if there's three piled back to back, it basically means that whoever is behind those three streetcars has to wait like a good 30 to 40 minutes for the next one because they're all like basically not spaced out. Seeing this type of thing used to like or does still bother me a lot. And I would like pull aside whoever I can find. It could be the ticket booth collector, it could be the driver, all these people and be like, why aren't you doing something about these things? Same with like last week on vacation in Azores in the resorts. I kept on like finding things where I was like, oh my gosh, if I was running this thing, it would be different. You know, like why are you playing sleepy time music at the dinner bar at like, 9 p.m.? And I look around and there's no one in the bar because the music is horrible. But it's
There
just
you go.
it's just
Yeah.
yeah, not being able to take these kind of why don't you just tweak it? I think has really helped me in business. So
Amazing. Oh my God, yes, being a parent. And yes, I can attest to that inefficiency. And I cannot wait to introduce Sylvia. And let's get right into it because we have a lot to talk about today. And Sylvia has an incredible background. So, Sylvia is the CEO of Return Bear. If you haven't heard of Return Bear, they're a company that's transforming one of retail's biggest pain points, which is returns. And Sylvia will share a lot about how she doesn't think it's just a software business. The really gnarly parts are actually in the reverse logistics of it. So big operational challenges built with some incredibly smart people. She is an incredible leader and a very dear friend. A small fact is that she is actually the only woman leader who I have ever reported to. So Sylvia and I met at Shopify. It's a wild story, and we'll get into a couple of those things as we go today. But what I find most compelling about Sylvia is not just her impressive resume. She's been at Google, she's been at Shopify, she's been at some of the tech giants. But she's also a founder of a cancer care company called Amadira, and she's going to share some of her stories there. But she's going to share the journey that brought her here. And what I've seen and we are going to talk a lot about is how she's navigated a lot of cultural expectations, lots of gender barriers in the tech industry, and just the pressures of being a leader when everything's going on in your life. It's just like the wholesome of who you are. Sylvia has not just consistently found ways to like survive, but she's thrived in those situations, which I find fascinating, and her stories are amazing. And she's always led with authenticity to a point where, I mean, now what, like a decade later, we're still in touch and we're still great friends. So today we're going to get into some of those stories, and we're going to talk about moments that tested her resolve. We're going to talk about how she powered through being resilient and some of the wisdom she's gained along the way, and she's going to be sharing a ton of stories there. So let's jump right into it if you're ready. As always, we're going to start the conversation. If you have any questions or you want to add on and ask Sylvia questions, just kind of jump in and throw it in the chat. I'll be kind of keeping an eye on the chat, and then I will bring it in as we can. All right, so let me pin Sylvia. There we go. Okay, Sylvia. So tell us about, let's start from the beginning, like all the way from the beginning. Um, you grew up as daughter of immigrants in Canada. How did your parents' journey and your journey evolve over time? So talk us through that a little bit and share your story there.
So I have very what you would consider as very typical Asian Chinese parents who focused a ton on academics. My parents on both sides came from really like super humble backgrounds in Hong Kong. My dad clawed his way through the academic scene and ended up by a mix of like luck and also just getting some funding from his uncle, managed to get into university. So on that side of the family has never happened before. But from studying super, super hard, he ended up owning the academic record of Hong Kong University, which is their most highly rated one there. Um, for the whole time he was there, he was basically ranked first. And even after he left for 3 years after that, his record no one could beat. So when he moved out to here and had me and my brother, the expectations were super, super high on me. Like you know when people joke about having the Asian parents who only care about the grades, like I had that to the extreme. It was, like, oh, you got 97%, great. What happened to the 3%?
I
Like,
know.
whatever it is. But now I kind of can translate that into, just the rest of my life. If I'm going to VCs now and fundraising for a return bearer, and you know, um, they all reject me. I just feel like maybe, they just lost their 3% of, empathy.
There you go.
But yeah, like so with that background, I think growing up and even leading up into my career, it obviously shaped me, and I had to do, I wouldn't say like I wouldn't have to specifically overcome things, but I would have to like kind of adapt along the way. And a lot of times I don't think I realized what I needed to adapt to. So for instance, I got in a speaking coach last year because the board of directors that I have now asked me to increase my CEO gravitas, which for me is a little bit of, oh, why can't you be more like a white man, realistically speaking? Right? Like I'm speaking to you like I am, like I'm being very normal to you here, but like the idea that I'm not like, how would I say it? See, I think they want me to be like this with you.
Yeah.
And perhaps speak slower, louder, have more projection. Anyway, so the feedback came back, you need more gravitas. So I got a speech coach. And the first thing she did with me was do an assessment, and she said, "Oh, I know what your problem is." And I asked her, "Okay, what?" And she's like, "You're Chinese." I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't think my English is bad because of like English is actually technically my first language. I
Yeah.
learned Cantonese first, but for the most part, I don't even speak it now. The fact that it influences how I speak now, I find kind of funny. But then she started showing me the examples of where I'm speaking English in a way that actually shows my Cantonese background. And
Yeah.
it does make it worse. Like I trail off on some consonants. I down talk, which actually is quite, I think, normal for a lot of people too, but it's worse with the Cantonese background
Mhm.
because of the tones that are in Cantonese. But anyway, all that said, it turned out that something that I never thought had influenced where I am now ended up being something I needed to overcome. Speech is one of them. The way I carry myself as just more so a woman has been another one. But even like being some smaller things I take for granted, like being humble is very Asian. But even that I've had to kind of push aside a little bit more. So
Oh
I don't
my
know,
God.
it's a very long lead. Um,
I mean, but it's interesting because all of the things that you defined about yourself is what makes you you. And it makes you different from everyone else who exists. So I don't know, the speaking coaches can take their time, but they can they can say what they want. But Sylvia, I think who you are and how you show up authentically is like such a big part of who you are. So kind of let's jump into that aspect a little bit, which is, was there a moment where you realized these are things where I can and will improve on because of what I need to achieve and move forward in, but these are the things that I want to retain to continue to be who you are truly. So talk to us a little bit about that and how you navigated that.
Actually, I think over time, like I think like earlier in my career, I'll just say, I had more of the sense of I don't want to change because that means I'm going to be different,
Hmm.
and that's not who I am, right? Like I don't want to be the person who isn't humble because that is who I am. But over time, I think I've maybe with the age, I've mellowed out a little bit. So what I've realized is that if you don't change yourself, you also can't be the person that you want to become. So I think over time, more and more, I've let go of the concept of my being or my identity being a fixed thing, and that the idea that having that fixed those fixed values is actually a good thing. I've also started to let go of.
Oh
Uh,
my God. Okay.
I don't know.
So
You can't grow if
yeah,
you're always fixed on very specific things. You know.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and I would say values too. It's a yeah. It's not. I don't see it as a good thing to always just be fixed in one thing because context changes.
Situations change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about building your experience through various challenges, because I think that is kind of where this conversation is naturally leading to, at least for me. So before taking over Return Bear, I know you held leadership roles and exec roles at like Shopify, at Google, at Coro. What were some of the challenges that you faced in these roles that feel like set you up for this? Like, is there like a track through that you kind of see?
Oh, there's so much. Um, and I would say like actually just naming some of the larger places I've been at, like Google or eBay or Shopify. But I think a lot of the learnings I've had also were from the smaller places I worked at, the startups. So I worked at 500px, which was A16Z investment at the time. Um, and it was funny, they were a Instagram before Instagram. So right when A16Z invested in them, it was kind of growing. It was typical proverbial hockey stick. But then Instagram came along and it started kind of going like that. And that's when I joined to try to see if we can do a turnaround.
Yeah.
Uh, so from there, I kind of actually learned a lot in terms of needing to make decisions really quickly for a business, or you just a lot of times you're just fighting against time. Um, so the challenge there at the time, it was maybe too much specific like business stuff, but we had three specific business paths, and we found as a leadership team very hard to pick which path to do. So we
Okay.
kept on trying to do all three at the same time, and eventually ran out of money because of that. So from there, I learned a lot of like just overall business management, like how do you take some risks with what you're doing as opposed to trying to be too safe.
Yeah.
Um, at some of the larger companies, I think the most important lessons I learned were more on the people side. Because when you have a larger organization, obviously you just have more people to deal with. So like say, for example, at Shopify, I think what I learned most is actually trying to let go of your own ego for the sake of the company. Right, and Aksha probably remembers this because that's where we worked together. But a lot of the execs at the time, we would float around the ideas of us reporting, changing up our reporting structure. So I remember the CMO came on board and he was like, wow, you know a lot of marketing too. How come you like I would happily report into you if you do this stuff. Same with our VP of data. Um, we would be the days I would go to her and I'm like, why don't I just report into you? Because this part of the company would be better. And vice versa. She's like, yeah, but that would be screwed up. So anyway, the idea of having an environment where people are actually not, tied to their domains and fighting for, oh, I'm going to own this big portion of the business and actually trying to break that up for the sake of the company, for me was a huge, huge learning. Not like having people who are able to let go of that ego around you is super cool to have and great influences. Um, that was
Yeah.
like, the big thing for that I learned at Shopify. At Google, I would say a lot of what I learned was related to human potential. Because I was there when Laszlo Block, if you guys know of him, was head of HR there, and he did all that research into, the Google interview process about what
Yeah.
goes wrong when presumably Google's hiring the best of the best at the time. How is it possible that, a lot of these people are being hired in and not making probation, not getting past probation even, right? So
Mm.
he was doing a lot of those experiments on, okay, what if, when they don't pass probation, we actually give them a second chance and put them onto a different team.
Yeah.
And 95, I think it was something crazy, like 95 to 99% of the time, the second team they would be extremely successful at. So a
Oh,
lot of
wow.
times it isn't necessarily that we found the wrong people. It's we got some good people. We put them in the wrong environment.
Mm.
So a lot of the idea that, human potential isn't fixed, that you can actually, use growth mindset really heavily and develop people and actually believing in them to give them multiple chances in the same company, was something that I really took away from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's wild because you would think that it's actually so counterintuitive. You'd think that it's like such a large portfolio of stuff to work on at Google and like so many different, microcultures and like areas of expertise. And you would think that that would be the normal thing to expect, but that's wild. Let's jump a little bit into imposter syndrome because I know, Sylvia, you and I have talked a lot about this, and I feel like a lot of execs, as they're kind of stepping into their new roles and or trying to do the next big thing for them, kind of face imposter syndrome, right? So, how have well, one, has this been part of your experience, and if yes, how much? And how have you navigated this, and how have you gone beyond it?
Definitely I have it. Um, I would say it's also maybe tied to the Asian upbringing. That humility also means that you look at yourself almost as never good enough to begin with. Like the idea that I would go up to my parents and tell them I'm good enough at something and it would have never, well, like it doesn't.
It doesn't.
Even now, like I would send, I don't know what it is. I do a talk on stage at Manifest. I send it to my parents and my dad will be like, why did you laugh there? That's not the point. So the criticisms, the idea that anyone is perfect just doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
So that for me definitely has led to imposter syndrome. It's like, well, do I belong here? Like, do I belong on the stage? Is some security person at the company gonna come up and walk me out of the door because it's like, hey, you don't belong here. Um, Yeah, I don't know. Like I think like a lot of people, probably in the room who might have imposter syndrome, you kind of deal with it on a day basis and deal how you can, right?
Mhm.
For me, once I realized that a lot of people have the same feelings, that has really helped. And then there's kind of personal things that I do just within me in my own head to cope. And then I think there's external things that always help me um, as well.
Yeah.
Um, within my own head, I think knowing that other people experience this all the time, knowing that actually you can't, if you don't have it, it's also another issue. Like if you don't have imposter syndrome, you're probably way too comfortable in your own role and therefore not growing, right? So it's
Mhm.
actually flipping the concept of imposter syndrome being bad. It's
Yeah.
actually not a bad thing necessarily. It's actually, for the most part, a good thing because it means you're challenging yourself. So yeah, a lot of the self-talk for me has helped, but also like a lot of just writing down, if it gets really bad, like writing down the reality, I find helps a lot, right?
Mhm.
Like if my dad comes back and tells me that my talk wasn't good enough, but the reality was I had an audience of whatever it is, 500 people, and all these people came out to me, and I actually made business out of it. The
Yeah.
the objective truth is very different than what you have, what you might feel, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So actually being able to kind of write down the facts even and share that with yourself, I find really helpful.
Yeah.
Then on the external side, obviously being able to share, right? Share with groups like this or talk to other people who might be experiencing the same thing, I find always helps. My go-to is usually my husband, so that he can
Mhm.
kind of slap me silly and be like, well, that's why are you feeling like that? This makes no sense. Right? Look what you've done.
Yeah.
So yeah, having other people there to kind of have your back for me is also super important.
Amazing. I can tell you are very good at, I mean, I know this just because I know you really well, and is that like the facts and the perception piece, I think is such a powerful technique because one, there's so much more data, either qualitative or quantitative, to just like set the reality for you. And then there's perception, which can come in so many different ways, right? Like your own perception, people's perception, all of that. I love that technique of being able to separate the two and then just kind of seeing, okay, the facts are the facts, the perception is the perception. We can always change perception. You can't change the facts. Um, so
Well,
Sylvia,
there's data too, because my data background, like there's so many stats out there about how actually being in the imposter syndrome scenario is actually needed, right? If you want to succeed in business generally, like if you're running a business like me, you probably need to like fail 10 times more than your competitors in order to get to the success, and you need to beat them.
yeah,
If you're going to be failing 10 times more, the chances are you're going to feel inferior because you're failing all the time. But yeah, like these stats also help me because you just know that sucky thing that you are feeling is almost like a necessary thing to get to success. It's
yep,
knowing that failure has to happen to get to success.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes. And I think your data background is completely shining through here for what it's worth. Okay, let's chat a little bit about like, was there this moment when when you really felt like, oh my God, this is such a big setback. I don't know what I'm going to do from here. And one, what was that setback that felt so devastating, but ultimately actually proved valuable? So you kind of talked about it just now, but can you give us an example of how you felt that?
Oh, so many. Um,
But the thing
Most actually, well, the most recent one, if you guys saw on the news, actually, I don't know whether you guys would see this news because it's a very Canadian thing. So Return Bearer is founded in Toronto because that's where I'm based. And our first large client that we signed up was the Hudson's Bay Company. So it's the parent company of Saks and also Neiman Marcus. So it was a big deal for my team because that was the first large enterprise deal. It kind of proved that we're like legitimate, our services are needed, and it was a step up for the company, right? We had to do all these more enterprise things that we wouldn't have done. We got SOC 2 compliance, we got like
yeah.
a whole layer of kind of like, yeah, processes in the company that we wouldn't have built otherwise, right? But yeah, if you saw in the news last week, HBC, the Canadian portion, just filed for bankruptcy last week, we had known internally, we had known that this was coming for a while now, probably a good 6 to 9 months, because we can see that it was coming. And so when that happened, and still to some extent, like the team was feeling really bummed out because we took so much effort and energy to get that contract delivered and going, and to lose it basically, a year in to a 3-year contract is super sucky. We divested so much of our time and energy into there. And for us, obviously, it's a write-off on our like company's valuation, right? So I am doing fundraising now, but we're gonna have to write off that contract completely. So it is sucky. But on the other hand, what I like over time, what we've realized is, well, one, our revenue has gone way past them now. In the beginning, when we first signed them on, they were practically 80% of our revenue. Now they're, less than 15%. So it is a write-off still, which isn't great, but like the fact that we've gone past them in that time frame, is a good thing. And I think most of the team now it took some time, right? Because we knew this was coming for a while. Within the last 6 months, we started to realize, wow, this actually is a good thing for us to learn, and that things don't always work out. But in the meantime, we have, all the processes and all the learnings that we put in place, we are still using, right? So overall, we are still ahead of where we were. Yeah, it took some time for us to get to that feeling. The most recent one.
Yeah, amazing. I think I actually did see that news, and it's a huge shocker to me because I'm Canadian, and it's almost like the Macy's, the equivalent of Macy's in Canada. So that was a big shock in terms of what's happening. Okay, let's chat a little bit about your personal resilience journey. So Sylvia, talk to us a little bit about what inspired you to found Amadira. I love that story because I feel like it it has so much not just about your resilience, but also how you took a problem to like a solution mindset. So tell us a little bit about that founding story, where you are in that journey.
Yeah, so when I was 35, I got hit with a breast cancer diagnosis, which is more and more common nowadays, unfortunately, in young folk. But this is now, I'm just telling you my age. This is like basically 10 years ago now. Um, and at that time, like every decade, the cancer rates unfortunately are increasing quite heavily. So even 10 years ago, it was rare enough that most of the doctors didn't know what to do with me. It was, oh, it must be in the family, but it's not. Or, it must be your lifestyle. But, it's not like not obese. Like they looked at all the factors and none of it was there. So it confounded them. But anyway, because it was rare and that rare, for me, it felt like it was not just, oh, I got a cancer, but it was almost like I don't know, it's like that feeling of you become the specimen that these doctors want to analyze because there's something wrong with you. So anyway, it hit me hard because at that time I had 2 kids. I had a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And while they were going through all of the diagnoses and figuring out how bad it actually was, I wasn't sure that I had much time left. So I was left in total tears most of the time, thinking I couldn't raise my kids.
Yeah.
But it turned out I was lucky. It ended up being more a garden variety cancer, which is again also rare because for the most part, if you get it early, it tends to be quite aggressive. But somehow I lucked out and I got a more slow growing garden variety, and ended up being very treatable. So when I finished all the treatments in around 2020, and I left Shopify, where I was working with Aksha, I decided I should give back to the community because there were, at that time now, well, it still is, a growing number of young people with cancer diagnoses. And a lot of times when it hits the friends and family don't know what to do, right? You get hit with this and you're like, okay, what do I say? How can I help? And so I created a cancer care box brand to essentially help the friends and family who might not even actually be in the same place as a cancer patient to provide something that might be helpful. So it's just box sets of things that would be helpful in therapy, like bath salts for if you need a spitz bath during chemotherapy, or green tea that's really helpful for oxidization, things like that. Yeah, that's been
That's the story.
that's the story there. Yeah.
Yeah. And the tell me a little bit about where you are with that journey right now, and how, I mean, how investing time and effort and giving back has actually shaped who you are today as a leader.
It's interesting because that was the first time I essentially was packing and shipping things as an e-commerce merchant myself,
Yeah.
so it's a lot of manual labor. I would not say my body is built for manual labor. So even packing and shipping small things, it was super tiring. Um, what happened was, by the time I started working on Return Bear, I realized I just couldn't focus on both at the same time. So I sold a lot of the boxes to some of the local hospitals and to the cancer care organizations like Breast Cancer Foundation and all and that. And then the remaining, I did a partnership with One Village, which started as a cancer community, but has expanded now to support like people of every kind of health change that you can think of, including diabetes and other things like that. So I kind of rolled up the organization in with One Village, and it's kind of living on through there. But right now, on a day-to-day basis, I'm not shipping boxes anymore. I just couldn't do it at the same time.
Well, you're still dealing with boxes, just at a different end of the supply chain, I'm guessing.
Yes, yes, different types.
All right. Okay. We're going to go a little bit into breaking through expectations. And so, Sylvia, I think you shared this as both a woman and a person of color, specifically in tech executive leadership. How have you, one, I'd be shocked if the answer is no, but have you had situations where people completely underestimated you? And then when they did underestimate you, how did you handle that situation and get out of it on the other end?
Sometimes I feel like underestimating is not a bad thing, because then I get to show them what reality is later on. But the story that I've been sharing, because it was just such a bad thing that happened to me. Because I've been in tech my whole life, right? And being in Women in Tech talks has been a fixture. Like I've done International Women's Days talks for as long as I can remember now. But then I switched into logistics, and it is infinitely worse in logistics. When I first started at Return Bear, this US-based company reached out to me for a partnership, which was a big deal because they're way bigger than I am. But they reached out to my team. My team set up the meeting, and I showed up on the call. It was a Zoom call like this. I didn't even say anything. I didn't say hi. It was just my face. And the president of the company interrupts me and says, "Oh, sorry, I thought we booked the CEO of your company." And all they saw was this face. And so I was like, "I am the CEO." And the guy was taken aback. And then he starts digging himself into a hole, um, more and more, because he then asks me, "Do you know what e-commerce returns are?" And I'm like, "I run an e-commerce returns company. This is why you booked me." Then he mansplains the whole thing. I never had a call like this, but 15 minutes in, I told him, "Stop. You're mansplaining too much. I run this company. You want to talk partnerships. Let's talk about partnerships. This is too much. And if you can't take it, then I'm just going to leave because this partnership isn't going to work." Thankfully, it was the president and the CEO. The CEO walked all of that back, apologized profusely. 3 years later, every time he sees me, he still apologizes for that call.
You better.
Yeah. But like, what am I trying to say here? It happens. The thing I try not to do is not to go into meetings thinking that people already perceive me that way, because then I've let them win, right? And you can't keep on like trying to build business thinking that your opportunities are already closed when you haven't even seen what it's like. So yeah, for the most part, I do knowingly put on blinders, because how else can you run a business? You
Yeah.
can't.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think we learned this. Was this at Shopify, Sylvia? Where we're like, keep the most important thing, the most important thing, and that's it. Everything else is not as important.
Yeah. Yeah, and fast forward now, I am actually considering a partnership with them.
Yeah.
Um, legitimately. So, like I said, I believe in human potential and in change and also in giving second chances. So
Um,
it's not
yeah,
to say everything is fixed, because also if you view if I view that situation as fixed and that they will never change, I don't think it helps.
yeah,
You know, being able to mend that relationship and actually being able to, in some ways, say, hey, that was wrong. Let's not do that again, I think is more helpful
yeah,
uh, than actually trying to, break that and sever that bridge completely.
yeah. Okay, so we talked about the partnership piece. Like, how are you finding fundraising as a woman in tech and person of color? I want to understand that.
Well, fundraising is hard, but like I said, I'm knowingly trying to put blinders on, so I'm not trying to. I do not sit here all day thinking, "Oh, this is harder because I'm a woman of color." That just I don't find that helpful whatsoever.
Yeah,
Um, I will say though that more and more I'm starting to see that the opportunity is there for me to turn that into a different story for myself.
yeah.
This phase might be to some a non-CEO phase, but to others it completely is.
Yeah.
As an example, when Trump put in the tariffs, the Chinese government wanted to, and still does, um, get more of their merchants that are manufacturing goods in China to sell direct to consumer here in North America.
Mhm.
So I ended up getting approached by them to be a part of their next large reality TV show, which is a mix of Shark Tank and The Apprentice, um, but that will be broadcast because it's Chinese government funded to their entire base. So it's like billions of people at once. And it's going to be judging a lot of the Chinese brands and how they're selling direct to consumer here in North America.
Yep.
So for me, like the US to China kind of trade corridor has been untapped completely when you're looking at not just the supply chain, but like obviously where I'm focused on is the reverse logistics and the returns there. So it's an opportunity that I have actually because of my skin color.
Yeah.
And you know what? So yeah, I feel like it's not always just the doom and gloom. If you don't put on the kind of rose tinted glasses,
Yeah.
you're making it harder for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's shift a little bit into leadership. And what are some myths or misconceptions that you think actually need to be actively challenged today?
This is a big one because I am a parent. I do feel like we are sheltering our kids too much and also not setting them up for success well enough nowadays. Because even actually, if you talk about all the stuff that you just asked me, this entire call, right? Like all those challenges and whatever, for whatever reason, I'm naming stuff to you that for the most part, right, outside of me talking about my parents in my early stage, for the most part, all of these career learnings came after I graduated and it came
Mm,
in the career setting. I don't know why we kind of have this let's wait mentality, you know?
mm,
And a lot of we were also at Shopify actually, if you remember, where Toby made all the execs read Coddling of the American Mind as a
yes.
book.
Yeah.
That has stuck with me. If you haven't read that book, I would highly recommend it. And it goes into the fact that, as Americans, as American parents, we've become too coddling of the next generation. Like everything is about being safe, being in safe environments. Whereas what we want to do to build a resilient generation is actually to make it unsafe for them in the beginning. Having playgrounds that have more nails in them so that the kids can actually get hurt and know what it feels like, so that they can protect themselves, as opposed to expecting that when they go into the workplace, their employers are going to keep them safe and that their employers are going to make it a safe environment for them to learn. That's not how life works.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, a lot of my thinking more recently is just how do we get our our parents, but also our education system to make our kids more resilient earlier on and not wait until later. The concept of that there's a real world out there that you're not in as a kid is for me a weird thing. You should be in the real world from the beginning. You
Yeah.
were there as a
Yeah.
baby,
It's the real one.
you learning to walk means you have to fall. But somehow, for the most part nowadays, we're not letting our kids fall. And then wondering why later on, when they fall, they have issues. And then wondering why, when you're at my age, you have a imposter syndrome issue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. It's I think what you're truly, I mean, if I can go a level deeper, it's about, you know, like how do you just start that learning journey as fast as possible, right? And to your point, because that is the reality anyway, once you get into employment, like is there an opportunity for us to like challenge that early on? I think that's amazing. All right, I'm going to continue asking questions to Sylvia, but if you have questions, please drop them in the chat and or just come off mute and ask Sylvia. As you know, she doesn't bite. So just let me know you have a question and be
I
happy
don't
to.
know, actually told me this group is super engaging.
I
So you
know.
I get to live up to her expectations for me.
Come on, everyone. Like, yes, I promised Sylvia engagement. Like, so bring it up. If you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll be happy to bring you in. But I have tons to ask. Carolina, did you just unmute?
I did, yes. And I love what you were saying, Sylvia, that, about the kids and, like I have an 8-year-old and I'm so, like thinking how to make the healthy struggles real, right? And in a way, uh, let them learn by, like not make it so easy for them. Because I see it in the new generations, the people that, you're kind of mentoring and is everybody's so delicate that is like, okay, it's great. We want safe environments and so forth, but it feels like too much, like how we can have that balance. So thank you for saying that because I
No, I will rant about this for like okay, and here's the other thing. If we are all in tech in this room, my other rant and how it leads into the kids is that I don't think we as product managers, especially if you guys are in product, we don't value the impact that our products have on the world enough. We're too focused on the money that we were making off of the thing and not the actual social impact. Right? Like, I mean, if you had to take Meta as a very prime example and on what it's doing to teenage girls, like that for me is it shouldn't happen. Right. But like, yeah, why it has social media and for the most part, like games has made things too easy for the kids. Like my 11-year-old thinks that everything should be happened or anything that he tries, he should be able to get as a, in a result within like 5 minutes. But that's not how life works.
Yeah.
You know, he thinks every single math problem he should be able to solve within a minute because that's how games work. But that's not reality.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think we also need to make sure that our products are actually good for society. It can't just be about the money. And this gripe, one last rant from me. Uh, on the whole returns front and why I'm doing e-commerce returns. We in North America return almost $1 trillion worth of stuff every year. Most of it goes to landfill, which is completely bonkers when you think about the supply chain issues that we had to get the stuff here to begin with. Then we throw it all out. There's no reason for that. Like there really is literally no reason for it except no one's actually built the infrastructure. Why did no one build the infrastructure? Because logistics margins suck. And the VCs need to have unicorns in order to make a dollar. So no one's investing in the stuff. They only want to invest in software. So what I'm doing, yes, it's tough. And I'm fundraising, going out to VCs, asking them for money for knowing that it's not going to be as easy of a unicorn as anything else. But I'm doing it anyway because I think there's a social responsibility that we have to be building things that actually people need and not just makes you the next dollar.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
Yeah. I mean, I think what you just shared kind of starts back at like your initial thing, which is like you just absolutely cannot stand inefficiencies. I get it, Sylvia. I can see you've like kind of dedicated your life to making that happen. There are a bunch of questions coming in, so amazing. Okay, Mark has a question. Uh, Mark, nice to see you. Sylvia, how do you decide when to persist versus when to give up?
that's an interesting thing, Mark. Like when you Marky, you're for sharing with the context on that one. Like what would make you want to give up on something?
I think, sorry, I'll put myself, sorry, I'm in Starbucks. It's really distracting here. No, I think it's just more your general take because as a founder, I think there's always this mindset of like keep pushing forward, but at some point you just probably gotta know that it's time to give up. So more of a, I guess, mindset and framework in your mind. If you have examples, that would be great.
Well, yeah, so because where I'm going at it and why I'm asking you is for me, the give up comes from two lenses, right? There's giving up on your life dream, um, just because you don't feel like you're going to achieve that dream versus, hey, I'm just going to give up on this job that I have because I actually want to go and pursue my life dream. See what I mean? It's like, do you have some life dream, that some kind of primary goal that you're after? Because if that's the goal, I would say you should try to give up what you have to pursue it where possible. Why I personally put it is, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, you need to eat and breathe and have shelter, and those things have to come first, right? So if you're at the point where you're at a venture, but you really like aren't able to put food on the table for your kids or whatever, for me, that's a decision that you probably need to take into account,
Yeah.
right? But outside of that, I am the type of person to tend to believe that if you do have a goal, then pursuing it is a very noble thing. So I don't know if that answers your question. Well, yeah, generally I feel like don't give up on your lifelong dreams. You're gonna find a way to make it work. But if it is literally like I can't feed my kids, then not now, maybe later.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Amazing. Teresa, you have a great question, and I think you should come off mute and ask it.
Hey, Sylvia. The question I have was when your work culture or environment doesn't align with your core values or your beliefs, how have you navigated those situations? And I think the context is many of us have worked, whether it's startup or corporate, we've been in areas where maybe just one person or a few people, but because of authority or influence, we have to get the work done, but we know that it's not aligning with our core beliefs and maybe culture or how we treat people. We're telling the truth. How have you navigated that from junior, mid-career, all the way to senior roles?
There's someone else in the earlier chat was talking about their skill is knowing the circle of influence. I feel like for me, when you're earlier in your career, your ability to influence other people around you is just lower. But over time, it kind of grows. And so, at least in my career, over time, I've had more appetite to deal with workplace situations where people don't have the same values as me, because I feel like I have more influence over it and that you can actually change it. Whereas earlier on, it's a David and Goliath thing. And actually, going back to what Mark's question was, there were many times where I did leave those situations because I didn't think I can change it ever, and it was really bothering me that the values did not align. But yeah, I do think over time, though, you're recognizing it, that the overall company culture is hardly ever just a fixed thing, right? And there's always pockets of it. And within those pockets, it's almost like you can always influence it a little bit. Whether that is enough for you, I think is a very personal thing. Like what can you live with and what can't you? But for me, I have definitely left companies knowing that I wouldn't be able to change it.
Amazing. Right. Carolina, just come off mute and ask a question, and then we'll go to Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about mentors in your career and where do you find them? I felt like early on in my career, I had good mentors, but they were more kind of in different areas. And I'm at a point where I'm like, I think I need that. And just curious about, like any pointers of good experiences and where do you find those mentors?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think, like looking back, I don't know if I would say that I've had. Oh, actually, that's not true. I think I lucked out in having bosses who ended up being really good mentors for me. But outside of like the boss situation, I don't think I've been great in actually seeking mentorship outside of that. There have been times where I've done it, and got it. Like when I was at Google, there was a lady who's still there, who's running all of YouTube at the time, as a big shot. Her name is Tara Walpert Levy. She did a talk, and I went up to her, and I was super junior at the time. I didn't think she would say yes, but I asked her for some time and mentorship. And when she came on the call, the first thing she said was like, the only reason I said yes to you was you only asked for 15 minutes of time. More than that, I would have never given it to you. So from that, I learned, I think a lot of times, I'm sorry, I don't know if this applies to necessarily the men, because I do find women tend to approach it like this. We look for mentorship the way we're looking for a lifelong partner. We have a list. It's like, I want a person who will do this and this and this and this. And then by the time you get to the freaking bottom of the list, there's like no one left who fits the right? Like, oh, I want a monthly call at this time. Or like, I want that person to have been in this stage, and there just aren't enough people.
Yes.
So yeah, I have, since that Google incident, I have approached finding mentorship wherever I can with very specific things. Like, it's very hard for someone to say no if you go to them and say, hey, I'm experiencing this problem at work. Can you tell me? Because I think you've gone through this. They will hardly ever say no. Versus you go to them and say, hey, can you be my mentor? It's almost okay, well, what do you want me to mentor you with on? What's the time commitment? It's a very different thing. Whereas that one question you would have asked and you would have gotten an answer. And then the next time, if you ask again on something else, they would have an answer again. And over time, eventually it becomes a mentoring relationship without you ever having had to, push the wedding paperwork up front. So that's kind of my approach. The other thing I'll say is that, and I've been really sucky at this too, is I haven't looked for sponsorship as much as I can. And I tell that to a lot of people too. It's not about the mentoring, it's about getting the person to actually sponsor you, right? It's very different to say, oh, here's my situation versus, hey, you're actually on the compensation committee. Will you put in a word for me because of this work that I've done? Or, hey, yeah, you think my startup is great and think that I should be able to get funding. Fine. Are you willing to risk your neck on the line to actually get me an intro?
Yeah.
Easy, right? Because now it's your neck on the line. I don't think we do that enough in general in asking for sponsorship, because the sponsorship goes a lot farther than the actual sponsorship. But you guys have this group, which I think is what it's for. So you're on that perspective.
Yes, 100%. All right, Elizabeth, thank you for raising your hand and waiting. It's over to you.
I'll try to be quick because I know we're close to the end.
No, it's okay.
You talked about growth mindset, and I was really curious, as you've started to expand that growth mindset, I'm curious how your emotions, like the durations, the types of emotions, how that's been impacted as you walk into these very difficult situations.
Mainly I'm tired. I think it's the age, but also the parenting thing. It's tiring to keep on trying to learn and grow all the time. Even my husband says that he's tired of it. Because like I'm, instead of chilling out on the couch, I'm making him watch master classes with me or like this podcast. Or I'm making my kids listen to Mindset by Carol Dweck on a road trip. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think my main motion is actually balancing out the wanting to do all of that and actually needing some downtime so that you can actually take in the learning and have some creative space for your brain to absorb it all. Because otherwise it just becomes this like a robo machine of some sort.
And I guess it's maybe more of like, in that situation where you had that person, that president, question you about being the CEO. Like, as you've taken on more like growth mindset, do you feel that stuff doesn't impact you as much? Like, you're able to kind of let that wash over you? Do you feel like you just don't get angry anymore? Or if you get angry, so you spend less time in that anger? I was just curious if those type of emotions kind of have shifted.
Yeah, it definitely has. Yeah, it lets you. Yeah, I don't. Maybe in the moment I was angry, but over time I'm definitely not angry at like the system, if that makes sense, as much. Yeah, because with growth mindset you do see more things, again, things as opportunity. And I'm not quite there yet with that guy, but I swear, if he does another apology to me, I'm at the point where actually maybe that was a good thing. Maybe he actually treats other women better now. In every single one of these situations, eventually you can see, or even from the beginning, you can see that as an opportunity to do something good.
Yeah. Oh, I 100% agree with that. All right. I cannot believe we're 4 minutes away, but we need to get your feedback, everyone. I dropped the link as well if you'd prefer that. But if you are more in this instant gratification generation that Sylvia just talked about, then just you can take out your phones now and do the QR code thing. Either way works, but I'm sure we'd love to hear your feedback on this session, all of Sylvia's like knowledge bombs, as I call it. And then, yes, Sylvia, I'll be more than happy to share it with you as well. Amira had another question as you're filling out the survey, just to make sure we get as many questions in. Sylvia, what's the best advice you got?
It's interesting. Because of my data mindset, the best, it's not advice from a person, but from one of my favorite books called Hidden Potential. There's a section on what advice you should take and what you shouldn't. And it's basically 3 concentric circles. You want to take advice from someone who actually cares about you, who actually knows enough in your domain to offer some advice. And the last one was, and why am I blanking out? Cares. Oh, and knows you. That's the thing. Cares as in they care about the situation, knows you, and then knows the domain. You want all these things to be true. For a lot of the advice I think that you get, especially with stuff that you're reading online, is too blanket statement. If they don't know who you are and actually care about where you're going, it's kind of just
Yeah, it's just
yeah.
It's fleeting advice, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. That's helpful. I'll make sure I share that book as well. Okay, Sylvia, there's one more question, and I don't want to miss this one. What are your thoughts about KPIs or frameworks for measuring resilience and leadership? From Tim.
KPIs are frameworks for measuring resilience. Huh. It's interesting. Tim, are you asking about like whether I am on side with having regular measurements of resilience in a leadership team?
Yeah.
Tim, you can come up.
I think with either as a lead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tim, we're not able to very clearly hear you. I think it's breaking up. Do you want to try again? I mean, I think Sylvia's clarification, and if you have bad audio, you can just type it as well, which is really, is your question more about does she support having frameworks or metrics, or is it more general on does she have any specific frameworks? Okay, the more of the former, Sylvia. Like, do you believe in having these frameworks for resilience and leadership?
You know, it's funny. I believe in having frameworks in your mind for dealing with situations, but I, as a person, don't like to implement very many of them. I find that by the time you put somebody into a box, they become that box.
Yeah.
And for the most part, it's extremely limiting. Like we as humans aren't meant to be limited by a framework. The framework, like we think at most in 3 dimensions. So you have a framework that at most can have 3 axes before it breaks apart into like complete jello. And for me, for the most part, especially if you're more senior in your career, it breaks apart very, very fast. So if you're running like say large teams, like support teams or large teams on a very like in supply chain in my world, like the people who are actually in the warehouses doing returns processing, for example, it works great in those scenarios where the scope is extremely defined and limited. You can have some KPIs there and it works wonders. It works great. When you're in more like, you know, ambiguous roles like in product management, I have personally found that it's very hard to make it work.
Yeah.
Because your situations change so fast and the ambiguity of your goals, changes happens too often for it to stick in the long run.
Yeah.
Very often. So
no, I completely agree. I completely agree. All right, we're actually 1 over, and see, Sylvia, I promised you this is a very engaging group. They're like, once you open that up, they have a lot of questions for you. Thank you again, everyone. Really appreciate you engaging here. Sylvia, it was such a pleasure to host you. I am sure a lot of this group will reach out to you. Yeah, thank you again. I am so excited and so happy that you were able to come join us today.
my pleasure.
Amazing. Have an incredible week, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.